This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I'm your host Kurt North and welcome back to I Want to Believe Minute. We are watching and reviewing and talking about every single minute of the second X-Files movie, 1 minute at a time. And so far it's been a wonderful experience. This is our final minute with Michelle and Michael. So thank you for joining us again, Michael and Michelle. We're here to talk about minute 73 this time, running at approximately from 72 minutes to 72:59, and which Father Joe claims that he can feel Monica Bannon, as we talked about in the previous minute, prompting Mulder and Scully to exchange a look before walking away into the corridor, where Scully expresses admiration for Mulder's determination, but also acknowledging how stubborn he is, and that's why she fell in love with him. Mulder reflects on his inability to be together, alluding to previous events. So welcome back, Michael and Michelle. Mulder's determination, I think we'll start with, because he's determined. We mentioned in previous minutes about allusion to his sister and his determination on that. And Michelle, I think we've not really talked to you too much about that in previous minutes. So what do you think to this proxy of Samantha and his determination at this point, and how he's kind of come from, you know, the bearded man in the hut to where he is now, fully fledged Fox Mulder?
Mulder's motivation from the beginning was to save his sister. And even after his revelation in the original run of the show of her having passed and she's gone and, you know, there is no saving her at this point, his focus is still to save his sister, even if it's by proxy, specifically young women that he can save. That's sort of a redemption for him. Like, I couldn't save my sister, but now I can save this person. And his determination to believe in everything, well, just about everything, in order to reach that goal is, I think, cornerstone of his personality, of his being. So the fact that he is still that proves that he is still Mulder, despite being on the run and being in hiding for the past, whatever it would have been at the time, 6 years.
Just on this, Michael, actually, thinking about just while Michelle was speaking there, the complete flip around that at the beginning of our section here, our block of minutes, that Mulder's quite dejected because obviously Whitney couldn't save Whitney and he's kind of at a low ebb as such. And obviously Father Joe is now obviously at a point where he's not going to be with us for much longer. And all the sparks that happened with, this is God's work, Mulder takes that and runs with it. And he's gone full circle within the space of 3-4 minutes here. And I find that really interesting that we get that kind of, end of second act moving into the third act where in a space of 4 minutes, he's gone from desperation to actually determination. It's really interesting.
No, I fully agree. And I was actually thinking the same thing when I rewatched this before we got on for the podcast today. And one of the other things I noticed was that at the very beginning of the 4 minutes we've been covering, where Scully walks up to him in the hallway and holds his hand, we have this picture of them together and as a united front almost before he, removes his hand. And here at the very end of these 4 minutes we're covering, 4 minutes later, he's walking away and he's like, this is why we can't be together. That's a wild roller coaster to go through in such a short span of time, without them really interacting all too much, all things considered. I mean, for the most part, they were talking to Father Joe. That's kind of the roller coaster that is Mulder and Scully, though. We've seen them, their ups and downs together, separated, all of that. And thankfully, this movie does end with on a finer note for them. But they're separated again by the time the revival starts. So,
yeah,
maybe that's just what they'll do forever.
Maybe. Michelle, I want to talk to you about Fight the Future and the corridor scene there.
Yeah.
Because that whole scene in Fight the Future, when he's going, you kept me honest, you make me a whole person. Scully's the one that's trying to get away and leaving the FBI and things like this.
Mhm.
This is much more understated and underplayed.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's quite more emotionally impactful because the emotions are much richer compared to where they were back in 1998 compared to 2008, 10 years later.
There's a lot more history between the two characters. There's a lot, in a way, there's a lot more at stake. It doesn't smack you over the head with it as much as Fight the Future. It was like, holy crap, this is going to happen. She almost has the opportunity to give Mulder the speech this time, right? That your stubbornness, it's why I fell in love with you. And it's almost like, I don't have time for this. I've got to go save the girl. That's why we can't be together. And he kind of shuts her down, which is like, oh, that's cold, Mulder. That, you know how to hit where it hurts. Exit stage left, as it were.
Because the fragmentation of it, as you say, Michelle would succinctly put it there, it's just the way that, and that's why we can't be together, because he's got that one track mindness of actually doing what he needs to do to save the girl, which he's done so many times before. But this plays completely differently because the emotional stakes of them as a relationship within this movie. We get the scene when they're sitting at the bench together and they have that conversation about not being together anymore. We can't be together anymore. Scully at the very beginning of the film, bringing Mulder out of his shell because he's there, and we'll touch upon it later in the film, where it's like the darkness comes in and obviously tries to tear them apart. One of them's always got to be off kilter. They can't have this 50-50 split. There's always one of them that's dealing with something, and that's the thing that kind of pulls them in different directions.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way to look at it, too, because obviously in this case, Mulder's pull is the saving the proxy Samantha, right? But Scully's also had the pull in this movie, too, when it came to saving Christian, who's her proxy son. And so they each have these familial ties that pull them away from one another. But then when they're united concerning those ties, make them stronger. It's whether they're willing to do it on their own or not that really trips them up. And in this scene in particular, Mulder wants to do it by himself. He doesn't want to put Scully in danger. He's been trying to get her involved, and now he's at the point where he's like, well, you're not going to be, so I'm going to just do it. And of course, that gets him into a lot of trouble, and she has to pull him out of the fire this movie, and as opposed to the last movie, which I think is also a nice play on that.
You're out of the ice, as it were.
Yes. Always out of the ice.
Yeah, and I know I shouldn't do it because it's like much later in, but when Mulder says I'm cold, it still instantly calls me back to Scully. It does every time.
Yes.
Cold. And I'm Skinner going, I've got you.
Back to the hallway scene, sorry. The other thing that I that kind of almost stood out to me this time that I never really considered in previous viewings was I wondered if, in a way, Mulder shut down so abruptly and was like, effectively, I gotta go. That's why we can't be together. I'm out. Was in part, I'm throwing back your words at you because what you said to me hurt me. So now I'm going to use those against you. But also that he thinks that he's going to hear, a variation on the same speech again. Because how many times has she had to rein him in by saying, this isn't your sister. You can't save your sister. And he doesn't want to hear that right now. There's a chance that the girl is still alive. I'm going to go save the girl. And I don't want to hear your rationalizations as to why I can't do that. So I'm out.
Yeah. As you mentioned about reappraising, I Want to Believe, I did like it when I first watched it, but not to the degree that I like it more now. Yes, was I disappointed? I think I'm on record saying yes, I was. But at the same time, I still enjoyed the film. And actually, there's moments, Michael, that you messaged me about whether or not we were looking at which version we were looking at. But there's moments in the extended version I have a vivid memory of. And before we did the podcast, we were debating whether or not we would do the theatrical version or the director's cut. And there's a couple of different versions. There's moments in the director's cut. I just remember it's one of those things. It's such a vividly surreal film that it's memorable for that on its own. But then all this minutiae detail that we're going through now really makes it even more so. Filmmaking is filmmaking, but the similarities between Fight the Future and this are quite similar. There is reflections and mirror opposites and things like that you can look at. One of the reasons why I like Mulder as a character, and it's a little bit the same with Jack and Lost, that they're both characters who who are hero characters, but they're very dysfunctional or not, they can't really live in the real world. It feels like a real person. And he can be a dick, can Mulder. But at the same time, that's why I like him, because it's more realistic in that way. And I think that this scene is very real to me.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciate about what I Want to Believe is that it really allows itself time for these intimate moments that I don't feel like Fight the Future really was able to.
Yeah.
Fight the Future was very much a blockbuster, big X-Files extravaganza type film, right? Because it was the height of the show's popularity. But this movie feels a lot more akin to The Sevens or Christopher Nolan's Insomnia, or just these small, low-budget thrillers that Hollywood doesn't really make anymore. Because of that, it gives itself time to be super introspective with its characters and do interesting things like this, with each character trying to save their proxy characters. And likewise, it also gives time for these moments between Mulder and Scully that you just wouldn't have, at least not honestly, in a bigger alien invasion movie, right? And that's what a lot of us wanted, is an alien invasion type story to wrap up that whole idea. At least that's what I wanted as a kid, and that's not what we got. And looking back on it now, I'm really grateful, because I think we have this really engaging character drama that we wouldn't have had it been so focused on the plot. And that's, of course, the problem with television or film in general, is when you focus too much on character, your plot can sometimes be kind of fall apart. But then sometimes if you focus way too much on plot, like, your characters feel hollow.
Yeah.
And this movie, I think, made the wise choice of emphasizing character, whereas the last movie emphasized plot. Not that, you don't get both in both films. You do. But I think that's what makes it so special, especially so many years after the show ended.
I find more things to enjoy in the movie every time I see it, and these quiet moments are by far really stand out now more so than they did, way back when it first hit the theaters. It's definitely much more of a quiet, slow-paced movie, not, a popcorn, thriller, shoot-'em-up alien movie, which, like Michael said, I think a lot of us were looking for at the time. But then again, it was Mulder and Scully, so hey, I'll take whatever I can get. But I wish it was better. And, as I said before, each viewing, I enjoy it more. And smaller, quiet scenes like this make me really appreciate the characters, the writing, the movie itself in general.
Yeah. Yeah, the independent thing is definitely something that is missing from the world. I mean, we are starting to get things now coming through the pipeline, which are a bit more, money-saving films that are doing really well. And, and I think that hopefully there'll be a shift into more of the independent kind of movies like this as we move into the future. We do have one final scene, and we do see our antagonists in this. It's the first time we properly see them other than in mugshots. So, Michelle, I think I'll ask you first. There's not much to see, really. He's just on the operating table, but it does give me a chance to ask you what you think of actually that side of the story in this. We already talked about the fact that plot can sometimes give way for the feeling of the film. What do you make to the two antagonists in this movie and how it's portrayed?
There's still aspects of it that feel almost half-baked. Like, oh yeah, we got to have something that our heroes are chasing, right? And so some of it just sort of felt secondary in a way. Although when they're coming up into this section of our minute here and you just see him on the table, it was almost Dwayne Barry reminiscent. He's just sort of laid out on the table. You almost expect like laser beams to be drilling holes in my damn teeth. So, I mean, it was almost reminiscent of some of those abduction scenes back in the original run, which I'm not sure I noticed before. But yeah, I mean, as far as a monster of the week, it fit with the ultimate spirituality versus scientific belief, faith-based, science-based. It fit, I suppose. I still would almost, if we're going to do a monster of the week, I maybe would have preferred a different type of monster.
Like an actual monster.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what they're doing is
monstrous. I'd say it's more Millennium, what the human being can do.
Yeah, very Frankenstein.
Yeah, I mean, again, like what they ultimately decided to do with it, I can appreciate more now than back then. I still am somewhat ambivalent about that choice of quote unquote monster.
I like the idea of these Russian mobsters doing head transplants. I think that's a fascinating thing to center your plot around. Like I said before, it feels very much more akin to the low budget 90s thriller that they don't really make now, but they were phasing out at the time this movie was made. So this was the last of that type of era. And I think it's done really well. It feels very Millennium-ish, which of course I love. You know, honestly, if you had replaced Mulder and Scully with Frank Black, you could have made this a Millennium movie. And it would have been very different for sure. I'm sure they would have made it a lot darker, but perhaps that's part of what I like too, is like that idea of crossover thematically that Chris Carter's pulling from. Yeah, I don't know if we needed to see it here before we see it when Mulder actually breaks in, you know? But it is interesting to juxtapose that with this moment where Father Joe is saying that she's still alive. I mean, obviously, they're trying to clue the audience in, but I don't know if it's necessary.
When I spoke to John Kenneth Muir about it, it was more, it depends on how you view it. Like we're saying with the kind of Millennium aspect to it, that you've got these people who are madly in love with each other. He wants to save his boyfriend, basically. And, you know, he would do absolutely anything. Don't give up, which is the whole aspect of the story. So again, the monster of the week doesn't really work in concept of an X-File. The X-File is the Father Joe aspect of it.
Yes.
What they're doing is more of the Millennium aspect of it. And then you've got this science versus faith thing in it. So for me, it's almost like it's a concoction of everything that Chris Carter wants to talk about and anything he's discussed before, which in itself is interesting. And I had the debate with John about whether or not did we need to see more of them? But then his argument is a bit similar to what we're saying about the emotional aspect versus the plot, is that if you show too much of them, they don't become as frightening.
I would say the genuine shock of Mulder seeing it for the first time would have been us as well, had they saved it for that moment. I think we would have reacted the exact same way. I mean, earlier you see the dog with multiple heads, and that's freaky enough. So hold off after that. And don't show it until Mulder sees it. So you start to understand the full grasp of what's actually happening. I think that would have hit us much harder than it does here.
Michelle, any final thoughts?
I don't think so, though. Thank you for these minutes, because now I've got a new perspective and I'm going to watch it again and look for other ways of viewing things. It's always great to have these conversations because everyone has a different way of looking at the scenes. So this is always a great time. I'm never upset to talk the X-Files in any capacity. So this is great.
Yeah. And I'm sure everyone at home will be listening and hopefully getting a new perspective as well. As I say, we're over halfway through now. So we're getting into the final act. Michael, any final thoughts on the minutes that we've gone through today on the film itself?
Now I kind of wish they had brought Lance Henriksen back for this movie. But, you know, beggars can't be choosers, I suppose. I'm happy to have Mulder and Scully back. I did not love it when I first saw it. I was pretty underwhelmed. And since then, rewatching it, especially in light of the revival, especially in light of Joe Harris's X-Files seasons 10 and 11 comic books, I have such a new and good perspective on it now, to the point where I think there's times I almost like it just as much as I liked the first X-Files movie. And I like that movie a lot. So that's a good sign.
It is. Okay, then before we disappear, where can people find you online, Michelle?
Mostly on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. MMBaker13. If you don't mind looking at lots of ridiculous pictures of mostly shoes or just snarky comments in general, that's where I can be found.
Excellent. And not just any type of shoe.
Oh, no, specifically Converse. It's a very large Converse problem.
It is a very large problem.
Yes.
I can't imagine what your catalogue is actually like of.
That's too close of a word to organization, and it's not organized at all.
Fair enough.
It's more chaos than organized chaos.
Michael, where can people find you? What are you up to at the moment?
I actually just wrote a book this past year that came out. It's a novella, but it's kind of X-Files-ish. You know, it deals with themes of faith like this series does, as well as the Nephilim, like we talked about relating back to the All Souls conversation, called The Beast of Beartooth Mountain. You can find it on Amazon. And I'm working on more beyond that. There is a sequel in development. It's only like 120 pages. Not very long. You could breeze through it in an afternoon, but it's a lot of fun. A lot of things that I would have loved to have read as a kid, I've put into it. So there's that. And then I can be found on Twitter at MJPetty7 or on Instagram at Michael John Petty.
Okay, well, thank you both for joining me for this section of minutes. A good section of 4 minutes, which is really rich, actually. I was surprised when I looked at it and went, oh, right, okay, we've got the Father Joe conversation. I didn't realize how rich this was going to be. So it's been good to delve into that. You can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake, RMULDRAKE. You can also find me on Linktree, which is probably the best place to find me, which is Linktree /rmuldrake, the same moniker. I'm currently doing a Lost podcast now. I've moved over to 2004. So this is 4 years before this film aired or came to the big screen. So I'm now going through Lost, and that is starting its proper run in September to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Lost. And you can find that on Linktree, linktr.ee/The Magic Box Pod. And please come over there if you do like your Lost. You can find this podcast on patreon.com/the Xcast. You can find us on Twitter at the X_cast. Find us on the X-Files, a fan group, the X-Files Basement. On Facebook, you can find us on the Xcast Pod, on Instagram. So loads of places you can find us. And please, if you can, give us a 5-star review rating, as it really does help get us seen. We hope you're enjoying this coverage of I Want to Believe Minute. It's certainly been fun to record them and to get different perspectives. Carl Sweeney will be with you in the next episode. So until next time, remember, as always, trust no one.